Okay, welcome to the next coding tutorial. In this one, we're going to basically be building on the previous tutorial, which was using the bluebird counts function. And so that's why I have this up here already. This is just kind of where we left off in the previous video. And so we have a function over here that basically counts the number of bluebirds observed by observers. So basically it goes through and asks the observers how many they've seen. Yeah, so that's what this function does. So now what we're going to do is actually create a function that builds on that. That's going to be called bluebird all teams. So let's just write it down here because birds. So that's what our function will be called. It's saying that it takes no arguments. Okay. So basically it will get the number of teams from the user. So basically there'll be an input, it'll ask for user input for how many teams there are. And then for each team, it'll get the number of observers and the number of observers from the user and use the bluebird count to get all the total number of bluebirds for that team, right? So basically there'll be two inputs. You're gonna be asking how many teams and how many people in the team. And then we're gonna use that to run the bluebird count over and over again. And then we're gonna accumulate all the teams total into a regional total to return this value. Okay, so basically we're going to use the bluebird count to count the bluebirds for each individual team, and then we're going to put all that together into a single total for the whole entire region, right? Okay, so again, let's just start by reading the text and figuring out what this is asking us. So it's going to ask for an input, which is going to be enter number of teams. So there'll be an input, and then we store that into num teams. Okay. So that'll be one thing. Okay. And then for each team, so notice it says for each team, which to me sounds like within each loop, within a loop, we're going to get the number of observers for that user and use the bluebird count to get the total number of bluebirds for that team, right? So essentially we're going to be doing a loop within a loop, or we're going to use the function that has a loop within another loop over here, right? So for each team, so for I in range number of teams, we are going to first ask for, and again, I like to use current because that makes things easier for me. All right, so I'm going to create a variable called current number of observers, and I'm going to input or ask for user input. I'm going to say enter number in your team, right? So that will be good there. So I'm already seeing one issue that's going to come up. So here, num teams is going to be an input, which means it's going to be a string, and you can't do a range on a string. So I'm going to put this force num teams over here to be an int so that I can actually do a range on that number, right? Okay, and so basically, and so this current number of observers is going to be the number of observers that are going to be in my bluebird function, right? So I'm going to call my bluebird function, and I'm going to pass to it the argument current number of observers, and I'll have the same issue of it being a string, so I'm going to force it to become an int. And so now I'm going to pass for each team, I'm going to ask how many people are in that team, and I'm going to run the bluebird count for them to enter the number of birds they have in their team, right? And as I mentioned, this expression, this part of the code is going to take on a value now, which is the total number of birds in that team. And so here I'm going to call this, I'm going to store that information. I'm going to create a variable and assign a value equal to that here, which is going to be total birds for team. So this is the total number of birds in that team. And see, in here it returns it as a number, so I don't need to convert it. So this should be an int because I know that it's returning total birds from the bluebird function, and total birds is going to be an int. So this can be a numeric variable. So what I can do then is, right. So the other thing it's asking me is taking the total number of regional birds. So I'm going to create a variable called total regional birds. I'm going to initialize it as 0. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to, nope, outside of the for loop, because, no, inside the for loop, we're going to accumulate value into this variable, right? So we're going to have this total regional birds, which is the total number of birds for all teams in the region, start at 0, and then through each iteration of the loop, it's going to accumulate the total number of birds that each team has seen, right? So, and again, remember the bluebird function here actually does return something, and so that return value will be stored in this variable, and then this variable will be accumulated in this other variable. And then over here, this function is going to return the total number of regional birds, right? Okay, so let's over here, let's we're going to call this function bluebirds all teams, and we're going to say, just for this sake, no, that's fine. So we're going to have 3 teams. So let's do that, and then I'm going to print out at the very end of it the total number of birds printed out, observed in the region. Okay, so I did all this without actually verifying anything, which is generally not a very good idea. Normally I would build a small parts of the code and then kind of build on that. But I didn't do that here, so we're going to basically hope that everything worked out well. We'll see. Okay, so so that is a bad sign. It's already asking me, it's just running bluebird, which what that tells me is that I forgot to save over here. So I'm just going to close that out, and then I saved it, and I'm going to rerun it. And there we go. So we get errors over here. What is this telling us? It's telling us line 42, which that's obviously the main. So that's what we're calling the main. That's not super helpful. So it's telling us bluebirds all teams. Yes. So it's telling me that this function requires 0 arguments, but 1 was given, right? So over here, I passed a value of 3 over here, but the thing is the number of teams is actually an input. So I shouldn't actually be passing any arguments, and there's no parameters to that function, so I shouldn't have been passing any arguments to it at all. So right, so now we have 3 teams. So first team, say that there's 3 observers, 11, 3, and 2. Second team has 1 observer. They saw 27 because they're awesome. And then the last team, there's 2 people, and then 11 and 21. Okay, so and then it returns. So this function returns the value 75, which is the sum of all of these things. Which, if I do some quick math, yeah, I think that looks right. So it returns the value 75, stores it in a variable called birds observed in region, and then I'm printing out that value over here, which is what you're seeing over here, printing out 75, right? Okay, so hopefully that all makes sense. Again, I mean, all this is just kind of doing the same thing we've been doing over and over again, just kind of building, making it a little bit more complicated, but really like we're just doing the same things. We're just, creating functions. We're accumulating values in a variable. We're asking for input. We're printing stuff out, and we're returning values, passing values back to the main through the return. So, I mean, all this shouldn't be anything new at this point, and hopefully that all makes sense for you.